Once the United States Army stormed into Afghanistan with planes, soldiers, and a full rescue mission to save a hostage. The hostage was a goat. They had mistaken it for a famous singer, and they would not turn back until they brought her home. That really happened on South Park, and it is only one time out of many. For more than 14 years, this show kept handing the most powerful army on Earth the wrong target, and watching it charge in anyway. A drunk mob carrying fake guns. A real war started over a cartoon. Deadly weapons supposedly hidden up in heaven. A nuclear bomb built to drop on imagination itself. Every single time, the same thing happened. The military shows up, huge, loud, and certain of itself. Driven by a fear it never stops to question, aimed at something that was never the real danger. 10 cases, 14 years. One idea that never once changed. Welcome to East Park. Let's begin. The drunk army that took on the real one. Every year, the town of South Park puts on a show. The grown-ups pull old uniforms out of their closets, grab fake rifles, and act out a battle from the American Civil War. The war fought long ago between the northern states and the southern states. Folding chairs get set up in a field. Families come to watch. Grandpa Marsh is the one in charge of the whole thing, walking around and bossing people into their places like a tired old director. It is a small town event. The biggest worry going in is whether enough people will show up to fill the seats. That is where this story begins, back in the 3rd season of the show, in an episode from November of 1999 with a strange title, The Red Badge of Gayness. The kids are part of the event too. Stan, Kyle, Kenny, and Cartman have been practicing as a little marching band that plays music while the adults pretend to fight. They are supposed to march in time and keep things looking nice for the crowd. Cartman, of course, does not want to play nice. During practice, he bangs on the drums however he feels like it, ignoring the beat, ruining the song for everyone else. Kyle gets fed up and tells him to switch instruments. Cartman refuses, smashes his drum, and storms off in a huff. So the other kids decide he should be stuck playing the flute, which only makes him angrier. When the day of the reenactment comes, Cartman shows up dressed not as a regular soldier, but as General Robert E. Lee, the famous leader of the Southern Army. He has the full costume, the hat, the whole look, and he has an idea that is pure Cartman. He walks up to Stan and Kyle and makes a bet. He says the South is going to win this time. If the South wins, Stan and Kyle have to be his slaves for a whole month. If the South loses, Cartman becomes their slave instead. Stan and Kyle take the bet because everyone knows the South lost the real Civil War, so winning seems like easy money. What none of them count on is the schnapps. The whole event has a sponsor that year, a brand of sweet alcohol flavored to taste like s'mores. Jimbo announces with great pride that over 200 people are coming to watch, a brand new record for the town. He reminds everyone who was paying for all of it, and then the men start drinking. They keep drinking. The longer the day goes on, the drunker the grown-up soldiers get, until they barely remember they are only acting. This is where Cartman finds his opening. The men playing the South are loose, fired up, and full of sugary booze. Cartman, still dressed as their general, starts shouting at them, telling them to stop pretending and actually beat the men playing the North. So they do. They charge for real, and the Union side, just as drunk, gets pounded. The crowd thinks it is part of the show. It is not. Once the Southern side has won the fake battle, Cartman does not stop. He convinces the drunken men that the war is not over yet. He tells them the South can still win the whole thing if they keep marching and keep fighting. And the men, soaked in s'more schnapps and lost in the moment, believe him. A mob of middle-aged dads in costumes pours out of South Park and begins marching across the country, taking town after town, all while thinking they are still part of a harmless reenactment. Here is the part that makes the whole thing land. These men are not carrying real weapons. Their rifles are loaded with blanks, the fake rounds that make a loud bang but cannot actually hurt anyone. They have no real bullets, no plan, and no idea that any of this is happening for real. They are just drunk, confident, and following the loud kid dressed as a general. And it works. They roll through Topeka. They roll through other towns. Regular people who happen to be standing around get knocked down and beaten by this marching crowd, all because nobody is brave enough to tell a large group of yelling, costumed men to knock it off. Stan and Kyle realize what they have helped start and they try to stop it. They figure out that the whole thing runs on the schnapps, so they steal the alcohol supply, hoping that once the men sober up, they will remember it is only a game and go home. For a moment, it works. The march slows. But Cartman is not done. He gets his hands on more booze, the men get drunk again, and the rampage starts right back up. The march rush keeps growing. Some people join the Southern Army because they actually support it. Others join simply because they do not want to be on the wrong side of an angry mob. Either way, the crowd gets bigger as it moves, snowballing across the map. Then comes the moment the whole episode has been building toward, and it is the heart of why this episode belongs in any conversation about the show and the armed forces. The drunk reenactor army reaches Fort Sumter, the famous spot where the real Civil War first kicked off, and waiting for them for the first time is a real force with real authority. The National Guard shows up. These are actual soldiers, the people the government sends when a situation gets out of hand. Finally, someone with real power has arrived to put a stop to all this. So what happens when fake soldiers with blank rounds run into real soldiers? The National Guard fires a warning flare, a bright shot meant to scare the crowd into backing off. That flare comes down and lands on Kenny, killing him on the spot. And in a small, perfect twist, it is not Stan or Kyle who shouts the boys' famous line about the killers being bastards. Grandpa Marsh beats them to it, yelling it himself in shock. But the warning does not work. The drunken mob is too far gone, too sure of itself, and too large to be scared off by one flare and one dead paperboy. The crowd keeps coming. The real soldiers, the ones who are actually supposed to keep order, end up failing to hold the line against a pack of costumed dads who are not even using real bullets. The march pushes on toward the capital. Eventually, the Southern Army makes it all the way to Washington. They make their demand. They want the southern states to become their own separate country. To force the deal, they blackmail the president. They threaten to release an embarrassing secret tape of him with a famous actress unless he agrees. Worn down and cornered, President Clinton gets ready to sign the South's victory into law. A drunk crowd of pretend soldiers is about to undo the result of the actual Civil War, and the most powerful man in the country is about to let it happen. That is the moment Grandpa Marsh has his realization. The men still think this is all a reenactment. In their minds, they are acting out history, and history says the North wins. So if someone simply plays out the ending they expect, they will accept it and go home. Stan and Kyle put on costumes of their own. One dresses as Jefferson Davis, the leader of the South, and the other dresses as Abraham Lincoln, the president of the North during the real war. Standing in front of the White House, they act out the South surrendering. The drunken men watch, nod along, and treat it as the proper end of the show. The fighting stops. The men feel good about a job well done and head back home to South Park. For Cartman, this is a disaster. The South lost, just like always, which means he lost the bet, which means he is now the slave of Stan and Kyle. He is horrified, but Cartman being Cartman, he finds one last angle. He points out that since the North won and the North was against slavery, slavery is now over, so he cannot be anyone's slave after all. President Clinton agrees that slavery is wrong and against the law, and Cartman wriggles free. Stan and Kyle, annoyed at getting cheated out of their win on a technicality, throw an insult at the president as they walk away. There are real reasons this episode looks and sounds the way it does, and they are worth knowing. Around the time it was made, the show suffered a terrible loss. Mary Kay Bergman, the woman who gave her voice to nearly every female character in South Park, had died suddenly. The team did not feel right rushing out to replace her, so they wrote this entire episode to need almost no women in it. That is why the cast is a sea of men. Only 2 female characters even appear, the woman advertising the schnapps and a school teacher in one of the captured towns, and both were voiced by Trey Parker himself. A sad backstage moment shaped the whole look of the episode, and most people watching would never guess it. The episode changed the show in another way too, one that lasted for years. To play General Lee, Trey Parker did a deep southern accent for Cartman. He liked it so much and got so used to it that he found he could no longer slip back into Cartman's older voice from the first couple of seasons. The rough, garbled, little kid voice Cartman had used since the beginning faded out right here, and the smoother, more southern-tinged Cartman that fans know best took its place. A goofy costume bit quietly created the version of one of television's most famous cartoon characters. The title itself is a small joke for book readers. It plays on the Red Badge of Courage, a well-known novel about a young soldier in the Civil War. The show takes that serious old title and twists it for a laugh, which fits an episode that takes a serious old war and turns it into a drunken mess. So what is the episode really getting at underneath all the schnapps and the slave bet nonsense? A big part of it is poking fun at how seriously some people take Civil War reenactments, treating a hobby like it is sacred. Trey Parker and Matt Stone have said they noticed how intense these events get, even though they personally do not care much about them. But there is a sharper idea buried in here too, and it is the one that matters most for this whole video. The episode shows a real military force, the National Guard, getting completely outmatched by a crowd of confident idiots. The soldiers have the training, the authority, and the actual weapons. The mob has fake guns, no no plan and a lot of booze. And the mob wins. The people who are supposed to keep order cannot stop a parade of drunk dads. And the president himself nearly hands over half the country rather than deal with them. The joke is that loud confidence and sheer stupidity can steamroll right over the serious official people whose entire job is to stop exactly that. Fans noticed how good it was. Years later, when the official South Park website let people vote on the best episode of the third season, this is the one they picked. For a show with so many wild episodes, that is no small thing. For more than 20 years, the idea of America going to war with Canada stayed exactly where the movie left it, in the land of pure make-believe. Two friendly neighbors who share the longest peaceful border in the world were never going to fight. The whole setup was funny precisely because it could not happen. Then it stopped feeling so impossible. In recent years, real tension flared up between the two countries. The American president, Donald Trump, placed heavy new taxes on goods coming in from Canada, the kind of move that kicks off a trade war, and he began saying out loud again and again that Canada should stop being its own country and become the 51st American state. He mocked Canada's leader by calling him a governor, as if the country were already just another part of the United States. Canada's leaders pushed back hard, insisting their nation was not for sale and would never join. A plot that had once been a silly cartoon was suddenly playing out on the news, in real speeches by real-world leaders. People noticed the echo right away. News hosts and their guests kept describing the whole strange standoff as something straight out of a South Park episode, pointing back to the movie and its war on Canada. Online, viewers dug up old clips and the famous song Blame Canada, struck by how a piece of make-believe from 1999 suddenly matched the headlines. The show itself leaned into it, bringing Blame Canada back to poke at the real trade fight, and even teasing a fresh Canadian army marching off to war. A story built purely to be ridiculous had aged into something that looked, to a lot of people, uncomfortably close to real. The red badge of gayness is small in scale when measured against everything that comes later. A few hundred drunk men with blank rounds, one nervous National Guard line, one dead Kenny, and a fake surrender on the White House lawn. The fighting is mostly pretend. The army that shows up barely does anything. It is almost cozy compared to what the show would soon attempt. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously, because only months earlier on the big screen, the writers had already gone much further. They did not settle for a drunk mob playing soldier. They had the entire United States declare a real war with real tanks, real planes, and real soldiers sent to die, all over something even sillier than a bar bet. And the way the movie chose those soldiers and decided who would be sent in to get killed first turned into one of the boldest jokes about the military the show has ever told. Section 2. When America declared war on Canada. In the summer of 1999, the same year the town held its drunken battle reenactment, South Park did something far bigger on the big screen. They made a full movie, and in that movie, the show pulled off its loudest, boldest joke about the United States military, one that started with something tiny and grew into a real war with real soldiers and real death. The trouble begins the way most South Park trouble begins. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny, plus Kyle's little brother Ike, want to see a new movie starring their favorite Canadian comedians, Terrence and Phillip. The film is rated for adults only, full of swearing and crude jokes, so the boys pay a homeless man to buy them tickets. They sit down and watch, and they soak up every dirty word. Then they walk around town repeating it all, cursing in class and at home like it is nothing. Their parents are horrified. Instead of blaming the boys or themselves, they decide the real villain is Canada, the country that made the movie. Kyle's mom Sheila takes the lead. She starts a group called Mothers Against Canada, a crowd of angry parents who decide that the way to protect their kids is to go after an entire nation. What starts as a small protest swells into something national. Politicians get involved, anger spreads, and before long, the United States declares war on Canada. This is the part where the joke stops being small. The country does not just argue with Canada or pass a law. The military gets called up. Planes drop bombs on Toronto, a major Canadian city. The government rounds up Canadian Americans, ordinary people living in the United States who happen to be from Canada, and locks them away in camps that the movie cheerfully calls happy camps, even though there is nothing happy about them. A real army moves into action over a cartoon and a few bad words. The grown-ups never once stop to think about how insane that is, because in their minds, they are the good guys protecting their children. Kenny, meanwhile, has died, as Kenny tends to do. Down in hell, he meets Satan and Saddam Hussein, who are a couple down there. The two of them have a plan. An old prediction says that when Terrence and Phillip are killed, Satan will be able to rise up out of hell and rule the whole world. world. So the war the parents started is not only pointless and deadly, it is also about to open the door for the end of everything, and almost nobody up on the surface has any idea. The United States captures Terrence and Philip and decides to put them to death in front of a huge crowd during a big stage show meant to entertain the troops. Before that can happen, the army has to actually fight the Canadians, and this is where the movie delivers its sharpest punch. The soldiers are gathered for their orders. A general stands before them and splits them into groups, giving each group a job. He points to one group and tells them they will be the first wave, the ones who charge ahead before anyone else. He gives this group a name, Operation Human Shield. Their job, plainly stated, is to soak up the enemy fire so the soldiers behind them stay safe. The general even warns them that this group will lose a lot of men and tells them to keep their spirits up anyway. When the camera shows who is in this first group, every single soldier in it is black. Then the general turns to the group that gets to stand safely behind them. That group is all white, and the name he gives, the safe group, is a deliberately ugly one, built around an old, hateful slur for black people. The show puts that name in the general's mouth on purpose so that nobody in the audience can miss what is happening. The army is openly planning to send its black soldiers to die first, while its white soldiers hang back out of danger, and the man in charge says it out loud like it is the most normal thing in the world. Chef, one of the few adults in town with any sense, is standing right there in uniform. He speaks up. He reminds the general about the order that freed the slaves long ago, the one that was supposed to end exactly this kind of treatment. The general barely registers the objection. His response has nothing to do with what Chef said. He mutters that he does not listen to hip-hop, a reply so off-base that it shows he is not even really hearing the black man in front of him. To the general, Chef is background noise, so Chef handles it himself. He quietly tells all the black soldiers to jump out of the way at the right moment. When the fighting starts, they leap aside, and the white soldiers who were standing safely behind them, the ones who thought they had the easy job, take the hit instead and get blown up. The men who tried to use other men as shields end up with no shields at all. It is a small victory, but it lands hard because the movie has just shown, in the middle of a silly cartoon, a very old and very real ugliness about who tends to get sent to die in wars. While all this is going on, the boys put together a secret group to fight back and save Terrence and Philip. They get help from a strange kid called the Mole, who knows how to sneak past guards. The plan does not go smoothly. The Mole is killed by guard dogs. Things keep falling apart, the way they tend to in this movie, where good intentions almost never survive contact with the grown-up world. On the day of the big show, Terrence and Philip are brought out to be executed in front of the cheering crowd. Just as it is about to happen, the Canadian army launches a surprise attack, and the two sides crash into a massive battle right there. In the middle of the chaos, the boys rush forward and form a human shield of their own, a wall of children standing in front of Terrence and Philip to protect them. Kyle begs his mother to stop. Sheila, still convinced she is doing the right thing, fires anyway. Terrence and Philip fall dead. That is the trigger. With the two comedians killed, the old prediction comes true. Satan and Saddam rise up to take over the world. Sheila finally understands what she has done when Satan turns to her and tells her she has spilled innocent blood, dooming everyone. The mom who started a war to protect children has handed the planet to the devil. The way out comes from the most unlikely place. Earlier, Cartman had a chip planted in his brain that gives him a painful shock every time he swears, a punishment meant to clean up his foul mouth. During the battle, that chip breaks. Instead of zapping him, his cursing now blasts out as a weapon, bolts of energy he can fire at his enemies. He uses it on Saddam and brings him down. Freed at last from Saddam, who had been bossing him around the whole time, Satan is so grateful that he offers Kenny a single wish. Kenny, who has spent the whole movie as a ghost watching the disaster unfold, wishes for everything to go back to the way it was before the war ever started. The wish is granted. The dead come back to life. Canada and the United States become friends again. The whole bloody mess is undone, and Kenny finally gets to go up to heaven. The full cost of that war does not really sink in until a later episode of the show, where it is mentioned that 8 million people lost their lives in the fighting between America and Canada. 8 million dead over a swear word panic, all erased by a child's wish at the very end. The movie lets the audience laugh the whole way through, then quietly drops that number to show just how far the grown-ups were willing to go. A few things about how the movie was made are worth knowing. It is a musical, packed with songs from start to finish. One of the most famous is a big sweeping number where the parents blame all their problems on Canada, sung as seriously as if they were tackling a real crisis, which is exactly the point. Another is a marching anthem for the secret resistance group. The songs are catchy on purpose, so the audience finds itself humming along to tunes about war and blame. There are also famous voices hidden in the cast, including the actor George Clooney and the comedian Eric Idle in smaller parts. The movie also slips in small jokes about the military and the government being careless with with power. The same general who runs the war is shown having had Bill Gates, the head of the company behind the Windows computer software, executed simply because Windows 98 did not work well enough. A man is put to death over a buggy computer program. It is a throwaway gag, but it fits the larger picture the movie paints, where the people in charge treat human lives as cheap and their own annoyance as a good enough reason to kill. One more quiet touch. When Kenny's poor father marches off to fight, he wears a photo of Kenny taped to his helmet, a small, sad detail in the middle of all the noise. Put next to the drunken reenactment from the third season, the movie shows how much further the show was willing to push the same basic idea. In the reenactment, a mob of confident fools rolled over a nervous National Guard line. In the movie, the foolishness reaches all the way to the top, and the military becomes the tool that turns a silly parent panic into bombs, camps, and 8 million graves. The army here is not a bumbling background force. It is the machine that carries out the madness, and it does so while sorting its own soldiers by skin color to decide who gets to live. The show takes the army seriously enough to aim a real angry joke at it, the kind that sticks long after the laughs fade. What makes the human shield scene matter so much is how calm it is. Nobody in command thinks twice. The general reads out his plan like he is reading a grocery list. The cruelty is treated as ordinary, which is what makes it land. The movie is pointing at something true about how power can work, and it does it in the middle of a film full of fart jokes, trusting the audience to feel the sting underneath the silliness. For a movie released in 1999, all of this came out of a fake war against a friendly neighbor. A war nobody could ever really happen. The whole thing was made up, exaggerated, cranked to the most ridiculous setting the writers could find. The army marching on Canada was pure invention. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That would not stay true for long. Just 2 years later, the world handed South Park a real war, one that actual American soldiers were actually fighting in a faraway country. And rather than wait years to deal with it, the show put that war on television within weeks, while it was still fresh and raw and frightening, turning a real military operation into an episode before most of the country had even caught its breath. Section 3. The army that went to war for a goat. By the fall of 2001, the world had changed. On September 11th, terrible attacks struck the United States, and the country was left shaken, frightened, and angry. Soon after, American soldiers were sent halfway across the globe to Afghanistan, a country in Central Asia, to hunt for the man behind the attacks, Osama bin Laden. People at home were glued to the news, jumpy about every package and every stranger. It was one of the scariest, rawest moments the country had felt in a long time. Most shows would have stayed far away from a subject that fresh and that painful. South Park did the opposite. On November 7th, 2001, less than 2 months after the attacks, the show aired an episode that took the whole thing head on. It was the first new episode after September 11th, and it was titled Osama bin Laden Has Farty Pants. While the real war was still just beginning, while families were still grieving, the show put soldiers, bombs, and bin Laden himself right on screen, and somehow turned it into a story about a goat. The episode starts small, in the classroom. The kids are told about a charity drive to help children in Afghanistan who are suffering because of the fighting. Each student is asked to send a single dollar. Cartman, true to form, throws a fit about parting with even $1 for kids on the other side of the world. The lesson is meant to teach the children kindness toward people caught in the middle of a war they did not start. In return for the donation, the boys receive a gift from Afghanistan, a goat. The goat arrives in a package, and the moment Stan mentions where it came from, the adults lose their minds. His parents, Randy and Sharon, are terrified the box might be a weapon. A bomb squad is called in to examine it, men in heavy suits treating a confused farm animal like a ticking bomb. The fear of that time is right there on the screen, where a goat in a box is enough to trigger a full emergency. The boys decide the goat belongs back home in Afghanistan, so they try to mail it there. The post office refuses because no one will fly mail over a country that is being bombed. With no other way to return the animal, the boys end up sneaking aboard a plane they believe will take the goat back. The plane turns out to be a military aircraft headed straight for Afghanistan, and the doors lock with the boys still inside. They are trapped for about 20 hours, stuck on a flight into the middle of a war zone, and when the plane finally lands, they step out into Afghanistan itself. There, the boys meet 4 kids who look almost exactly like them: an Afghan Stan, an Afghan Kyle, an Afghan Cartman, and an Afghan Kenny. These boys live with bombs falling around them as a regular part of life, and they try their best to have fun anyway, playing and joking even as explosions go off in the distance. The two groups of boys do not get along at first. They argue back and forth about which side is full of jerks, the Americans or the Afghans, each one sure the other is the problem. It is a small, sharp moment. Two sets of kids who are basically the same blend blaming each other for a mess made by grown-ups far above them. Then the episode brings in its biggest target, Osama bin Laden. Rather than treat him as some terrifying mastermind, the show makes him a bumbling fool. The whole stretch of the episode that follows him is built like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons, the ones where a clever, sneaky rabbit runs circles around a slow, frustrated hunter who never lands a single hit. Cartman takes the rabbit role and bin Laden plays the hapless hunter. Cartman tricks him over and over. At one point, Cartman dresses up as a woman to fool him, and bin Laden, completely taken in, starts acting lovesick, his tongue rolling out of his mouth like a cartoon wolf. He even ends up making romantic advances toward a camel, mistaking it for the woman he thinks he saw. The most feared man in the world, the one the whole country was terrified of, is reduced to a clumsy idiot who cannot catch a fourth grader and falls in love with a camel. While Cartman is busy humiliating bin Laden, the real muscle of the story shows up, and this is where the episode earns its place in any list about the show and the armed forces. The United States military is on the ground in Afghanistan in force, and it is led by the very same general who ran the war against Canada in the movie. The army has a mission, and it is convinced that mission is deadly serious. Word has spread that the enemy fighters who controlled Afghanistan at the time, a harsh armed group, have taken a hostage, and not just any hostage. The military believes they have captured Stevie Nicks, the famous American singer, and that she is being held somewhere in the country. So the army mounts a full rescue. Soldiers, weapons, planes, the whole heavy machine of war, all aimed at saving a beloved musician from the enemy. There is only one problem. There is no Stevie Nicks. The hostage the military is so desperate to save is the goat. The same goat the boys got in the mail, the one the bomb squad poked at. Somehow looks enough like the singer that the army has decided it must be her, and they will move heaven and earth to get her back. The most powerful fighting force on the planet pours into a war zone, ready to risk everything. To rescue a farm animal, it is mistaken for a celebrity, and the army succeeds in its own way. The military saves the goat, fully believing they have rescued Stevie Nicks. In the same push, they finally gun down Osama bin Laden, ending the cartoon chase that Cartman had been running. But war is messy, and the bullets do not only hit the bad guys. Kenny, along with his Afghan double, is killed by stray gunfire, caught in the crossfire of a rescue mission launched for a goat. The army gets its target and saves its hostage, and innocent kids die in the chaos anyway, almost as an afterthought. The fear back home runs through the whole episode like a thread. Sharon cannot pull herself away from the news, watching the same channel for 2 straight months, unable to look away from the wall-to-wall coverage. The children of South Park are made to wear gas masks on their walk to school, as if poison might fall from the sky at any second. Officer Barbrady, the town's not very bright cop, takes to checking every kid's book bag, searching for threats that are not there. None of it makes anyone safer. It is all the panic of a frightened country, turned up loud and shown without mercy, where a goat sparks a bomb scare and children march to class in masks. The ending is where the show drops the jokes and says something it actually means. Stan walks outside and plants a tiny American flag in the ground. He talks about how he still loves his country even with everything that is wrong with it. He compares it to a sports team. America has its problems, he says, but it is still home, still his team. And if a person does not want to cheer for their own team, then they should get out of the stadium. After a full episode of mocking the war, the fear, and the army's goat rescue, the show lands on a quiet, sincere note about loving a flawed country anyway. It is a rare, soft moment, and it works precisely because the show spent the previous 20 minutes refusing to be soft about anything. There are real reasons the episode hits the way it does. The biggest is the timing. South Park is made very quickly compared to most cartoons, and that speed let the writers grab a subject while it was still burning hot in the news. The country had barely begun to process the attacks and the new war, and here was a cartoon already turning it all into a story about a misdelivered goat. That kind of nerve was, and still is, almost unheard of. Other shows waited months or years to even mention the events. This one waited weeks. The choice to build the bin Laden scenes like an old Bugs Bunny cartoon was a smart one. By dropping the most feared villain in the world into the role of a dumb, easily fooled hunter, the show stripped away his power. Fear shrinks when the thing you are afraid of trips over its own feet and falls for a fourth grader in a dress. Turning bin Laden into a punchline was the show's way of fighting back with the only weapon it had, which was a joke. And bringing back the same general from the movie tied this real war to the made-up one, as if to say the people running things never really change, whether the enemy is Canada or a cave in Afghanistan. What the goat rescue really gets at is the gap between how serious the army takes itself and how off-target it can be. The military in this episode is not weak. weak. It has all the power in the world, enough to storm a country and rescue a hostage and kill its enemy, but it points all that power at the wrong thing. It is so sure it knows what it is doing, so convinced that Stevie Nicks needs saving, that nobody stops to check whether the hostage is even a person. A force that mighty, aimed at a goat, is both impressive and ridiculous at the same time. The show lets it be both. The army is strong and foolish in the same breath, and the joke is that being strong does not stop anyone from being foolish. Looking back across the 3 stories so far, a shape starts to form. In the reenactment, the show aimed at a small National Guard line and a drunk mob. In the movie, it aimed at a made-up war that could never really happen, a war against a friendly neighbor invented purely for laughs. Here, for the first time, the show aimed at a real war, one that real soldiers were really fighting at that very moment, and it did not flinch. The made-up army of the movie had become a real army on a real battlefield, and the show treated it with the exact same mix of respect and mockery, willing to honor the country in one breath and laugh at its goat-rescuing soldiers in the next. The goat was a strange target for an army to chase, a confused farm animal mistaken for a singer, guarded by a clumsy villain in love with a camel. It seemed like the silliest thing the show could ever send the military after. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A year later, the show found something even sillier. It would put the United States military on a mission against a target that no plane could reach and no soldier could ever touch, a target floating high above the clouds. The government would grow so afraid of weapons that did not exist that it would seriously consider dropping bombs on heaven itself. Section 4. The plan to bomb heaven. By the 6th season, Kenny was gone. Not the usual gone, where he dies and shows up again the next week like nothing happened. This time the show had killed him off for real, and he stayed dead for almost the whole season. That setup matters because in an episode from November of 2002 called A Ladder to Heaven, the boys go looking for their dead friend, and their search somehow ends with the United States military preparing to drop bombs on heaven. Here is how a dead paperboy leads to a plan to bomb the sky. Before he died, Kenny had won half of a ticket, the kind that gets you a giant prize. The prize was a shopping spree at a candy store, basically all the candy a kid could ever want. The trouble is, Kenny had the winning half on him when he died, which means the ticket went up to heaven with him. Stan, Kyle, and Cartman want that candy badly enough that they come up with a plan to get the ticket back. They will build a ladder, a real one, tall enough to reach all the way up to heaven so they can find Kenny and ask him where he hid it. The adults watch the boys hauling lumber and stacking it higher and higher, and they completely misread what is going on. They assume the boys are heartbroken over losing their friend and just want to see him one more time. The grown-ups are moved to tears by this show of love and loyalty. None of them realize the boys only want the candy. The whole town, then the whole country, gets swept up in the story. News cameras arrive. The ladder becomes a national event, a symbol of grief and hope and childhood innocence, even though the kids building it could not care less about any of that. The cash grabbing starts almost immediately. A famous country singer named Alan Jackson shows up at the ladder to sing a sad, heartfelt song. He is not there because he cares. He is there to squeeze money and attention out of all the emotion swirling around the event. The show is poking at something real here, the way people rush to attach themselves to a tragedy when there is fame or money to be made from looking like they care. Then things get competitive in the dumbest possible way. The Japanese, hearing about the American ladder, decide to build their own ladder to heaven, turning the whole thing into a race between countries. And once it becomes a race, the United States government cannot stand the thought of losing, so the military steps in. Soldiers arrive and start constructing a massive reinforced tower, a proper engineering project built to beat the Japanese to the top. What began as a few kids stacking wood has become a national contest, with the army pouring resources into a structure aimed straight at the clouds. This is where the episode turns its eye toward the real subject it was chasing all along. Spy planes and scouts take photographs of the clouds way up high, and someone studies those photos and reaches a wild conclusion. The pictures, they decide, show a factory, and not just any factory. They believe it is a factory for building weapons of mass destruction, the deadliest weapons that exist, the kind that can kill enormous numbers of people in a single blow. Even stranger, they decide who is running this factory up in the clouds. Their answer is Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, who in the world of the show is dead and living in heaven. To understand why this was such a daring joke, the real world has to come into it for a moment. At the exact time this episode aired, the United States government was telling the public that Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, was secretly building these terrible weapons. That claim was being used as the main reason to go to war with Iraq, a war that would begin a few months later. Leaders were standing in front of of cameras and gathering at big meetings of world leaders to argue that the weapons were real and that something had to be done. South Park took that exact argument, the one dominating every news channel, and made it ridiculous by moving the imaginary weapons up into the clouds of heaven. The president in the show, a clueless version of George W. Bush, goes before the United Nations, the giant gathering where leaders from countries all over the world meet to talk things out. He stands up and tries to convince everyone that Saddam is building weapons in heaven. The delegates are baffled. They point out the obvious problem, which is that Saddam is dead. The president agrees that Saddam is dead, then insists that is exactly why he is up in heaven building weapons. To explain how a dead man ended up in heaven of all places, he launches into a long, insane story. According to him, Saddam first went down to hell, where he started a relationship with Satan himself. Satan eventually broke things off, and when Saddam got jealous and caused trouble, Satan punished him by shipping him up to heaven. The leaders listened to this nonsense in stunned silence. One official flat out asked the president whether he is high or just incredibly stupid. The president firmly promises that he is not high. He never addresses the stupid part. Despite how plainly insane all of this is, the plan moves forward. Scouting teams report that they have found the weapons up in heaven, even though there is no real proof of anything. A serious debate breaks out about whether the country should go ahead and bomb heaven to stop Saddam. Grown men in suits sit around tables discussing how to drop weapons on the afterlife, on the place where good people go when they die, all because of some blurry photos of clouds and a story about Satan having an ex-boyfriend. While the adults lose their minds over heaven, the boys are dealing with a problem of their own, and it is a strange one. Earlier, Cartman had gotten his hands on Kenny's ashes, the remains left after a body is cremated. Not knowing what they were, he drank them, thinking they were a powdered chocolate drink mix. Because of this, Cartman starts having flashes of Kenny's memories. Every time something bumps his head, he sees the world through Kenny's eyes, watching moments from Kenny's life. Slowly, with growing horror, Cartman realizes what has happened. He drank Kenny's ashes, and somehow Kenny's soul is now living inside him. Gross as that is, it solves the boy's real problem. During one of these head bump flashbacks, Cartman sees a memory of Kenny hiding the ticket in a box in his bedroom. The boys race over, dig through the box, and find the winning ticket. No ladder to heaven was ever needed. They go off and have their candy shopping spree, then calmly tell the adults they are finished with the ladder. The grown-ups, finally snapping out of their spell, realize how foolish they have been to believe Saddam was up in heaven building weapons. Embarrassed, they give up the whole project and go home. And then the episode delivers its final twist, the one that makes the whole thing land. The camera shows heaven, and up there, in the clouds, Saddam Hussein really is building a weapons factory. The entire crazy theory was true. The factory is disguised though, with a big cheerful sign that calls it Saddam's Heavenly Chocolate Chip Factory. God comes by and asks Saddam straight out whether the rumors are correct, whether he is building nuclear weapons up there. Saddam does not even bother hiding much. He calmly tells God that if he really were building a weapons plant, he would never make it look like a weapons plant. He would make it look like something harmless, like a chocolate chip factory. God hears this and decides the disguise itself proves Saddam is innocent, completely missing that Saddam just admitted the trick to his face. Saddam walks off, muttering an insult about how stupid God is. That ending is the sharpest part of the whole story. The government's reasoning was idiotic from start to finish, built on blurry photos and a story about Satan's love life, the kind of thinking that should never lead a country to war. And yet the weapons turned out to be real anyway. The show refuses to let anyone off the hook. The leaders were morons for believing what they believed, the way they believed it, and the danger they were chasing actually existed. Both things are true at once. Being right by accident after reasoning like a fool is not the same as being smart, and the episode makes sure nobody gets to feel clever about it. The military in this story is aimed at the most impossible target the show had found yet. In the reenactment, the army faced a drunk mob. In the movie, it marched on Canada. With the goat, it stormed a real country. Here, the army points its weapons at heaven itself, at a place no plane can fly to and no soldier can ever reach, over weapons that nobody has actually seen, run by a man who is already dead. The mission is not just wrong, it is physically impossible, and the people in charge are dead serious about it anyway. They would bomb the afterlife if someone would just hand them the coordinates. What makes the episode more than a goofy joke is how closely it tracked the real world. Most of the time, the show makes fun of things that have already happened. This time, it was making fun of an argument that was still going on, an argument that had not yet led to war but was clearly heading there. The writers looked at the reasoning being used on the news, the talk of hidden weapons and the rush to act, and they cranked it up just enough to show how shaky it was. They did this months before the actual war began, while leaders leaders were still trying to convince the public it was a good idea. Watching it now, knowing how the real war played out, the episode feels less like a silly cartoon and more like a warning shouted through a fart joke. The jab at Alan Jackson and the emotional cash grabbing fits the same picture. All around the ladder, people show up to perform their feelings for a crowd, to look caring while really chasing fame or money. The government does a version of the same thing on a bigger stage, performing toughness and concern about weapons while the real reasoning underneath is hollow. From the singer at the bottom of the ladder to the president at the United Nations, everyone is putting on a show, and almost nobody actually believes their own act. A dead friend, a ladder of wood, a race against the Japanese, and a president convinced that the deadliest weapons on Earth were being built in heaven by his enemy's dead ex-boyfriend's punished lover. The episode took the scariest argument of its moment and turned it into one of the strangest stories the show had ever told, then quietly revealed that the paranoid reasoning happened to be right, which somehow made everyone look even worse. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A few weeks after sending the army toward heaven, the same season would send a very different rescue team into a real war zone. Not soldiers this time, not generals or spy planes. The show would drop Santa Claus and Jesus into the middle of Iraq, hand them an arsenal of guns, and let them blast their way through a combat mission so bloody it made the army's goat hunt look gentle by comparison. Section 5. Santa and Jesus go to war. The 6th season ended on Christmas. On December 11th, 2002, just weeks after sending the army toward heaven, the show aired its holiday special, an episode called Red Sleigh Down. The title is a wink at a famous war movie called Black Hawk Down, a film about American soldiers trapped and under heavy fire in a foreign city, fighting to get back out alive. South Park took that grim war movie setup and dropped two of the gentlest, most peaceful figures imaginable right into the middle of it. By the end, Santa Claus and Jesus are mowing down enemy soldiers with machine guns in the streets of Iraq. It all starts, as these things do, with Cartman wanting a present. He has his heart set on a particular toy, a robot dog. There is one giant problem. Cartman has been a monster all year, and Christmas presents only go to kids on the nice list. To check where he stands, he turns to his naughty or nice accountant, a job held by Kyle's cousin, a boy named Kyle Schwartz. The cousin runs the numbers and delivers brutal news. Cartman is so far onto the naughty side that the math is hopeless. The cousin explains that even if Cartman somehow cured cancer and other deadly diseases in a single week, he would still owe Santa 2 presents just to break even. That is how much bad behavior he has piled up. Cartman decides he needs one enormous good deed, something so kind and selfless that it cancels out a whole year of cruelty. After thinking it over, he lands on his plan. He will bring Christmas to the people of Iraq. In his mind, spreading holiday cheer to a faraway country in the middle of hard times is exactly the kind of grand, generous act that will land him back on the nice list and get him his robot dog. His motives are completely selfish, but the plan itself sounds almost sweet, which is the joke. A terrible kid trying to be nice for the worst possible reason. To pull it off, the boys need Santa. They travel all the way to the North Pole aboard a magical train built by Mr. Hanky, the talking piece of poop who shows up around the holidays. Once there, they convince Santa to make a special trip to Iraq to deliver Christmas to people who could really use some joy. With the help of the Underpants Gnomes, the little creatures from the show who are always scurrying around, Santa gets his sleigh ready and lifts off into the sky, bound for Iraq on a mission of pure goodwill. Then the war movie begins. The instant Santa's sleigh crosses into Iraq, it is targeted. An enemy rocket streaks up and slams into the sleigh, blowing it out of the sky. The reindeer, the famous ones everyone knows by name, are killed in the blast. Santa crashes down hard, badly hurt, and within moments he is captured. His captors drag him away and begin to torture him for information. They soak him with water and hit him with electric shocks, demanding to know what America is planning. Over and over, they press him about America's intentions toward their country. Santa, gasping through the pain, keeps telling them the truth, which is that he has no idea. He is from the North Pole. He is not even American. He came to give out presents. None of it matters to the men hurting him, who are sure this strange man in a red suit must be a spy. Back in South Park, the boys find out their happy little mission has gone horribly wrong. Santa has been shot down and taken prisoner in a war zone, and it is entirely Cartman's fault. The boys understand that if they do nothing, Santa could die, and Christmas itself could be lost, so they decide to rescue him. They head back to the North Pole, grab Santa's backup sled, and hitch up a fresh team of reindeer with brand new names, replacements pulled from the stable. But they know a sled and some reindeer will not be enough to break a prisoner out of an armed compound. They need real firepower. They need a fighter. So they go and find Jesus. He is is busy leading a special late-night church service held in his honor on Christmas, calm and gentle as always. The boys tell him what has happened to his old friend Santa, and Jesus, the figure most associated with peace and forgiveness in the entire world, does not hesitate. He arms himself to the teeth with an arsenal of guns and climbs aboard the sled, ready for battle. When the rescue team reaches Iraq, Jesus goes to work. He storms through the enemy, gunning down every soldier who tries to stop him, blasting his way toward the place where Santa is being held. The Prince of Peace turns into a one-man army, and the show does not flinch from showing it. The team breaks into the room where Santa is locked up, killing the guards inside, and they free him at last. The rescue has worked. Now they only have to escape. But war does not let everyone walk away clean. As they retreat toward the sled, one of the enemy soldiers opens fire, and Jesus is shot dead. The savior who came to save Santa is killed in the line of duty, falling right at the moment of victory. What happens next is one of the show's oldest jokes, brought back for the occasion. For years, whenever Kenny died, Stan would cry out that they killed Kenny, and Kyle would shout back that they are bastards. With Kenny dead for the whole season, the catchphrase had been gone. Standing over Jesus's body, Stan cries out that the Iraqis killed Jesus, and Kyle answers that they are bastards, slotting Jesus right into the spot Kenny usually filled. A dark, silly callback at the worst possible moment, which is exactly the kind of timing the show lives for. Santa, freed and enraged at the death of his friend, takes over. He kills the soldier who shot Jesus, scoops up the guns Jesus was carrying, and goes on a rampage of his own. He blasts his way out through the enemy, setting off explosions as he goes. And in a strange, beautiful twist, those explosions do not leave behind craters and ruin. They transform Iraq into a Christmas wonderland. Wreaths appear, trees light up, tinsel and lights and decorations spread across the country in the wake of Santa's gunfire. The mission to bring Christmas to Iraq actually succeeds, in the most violent way possible, with a furious gun-toting Santa leaving holiday cheer behind every blast. While all this war is raging overseas, a much smaller, quieter story plays out back in town, and it pays off at the very end. Throughout the whole episode, a boy named Jimmy has been trying to sing the 12 Days of Christmas at the town's tree lighting ceremony. He keeps getting interrupted and keeps starting over, never quite making it through. As the episode closes, Jimmy finally finishes his song and flips the switch to light up the town Christmas tree. The lights flicker on, then immediately blow a fuse and go dark. A small disappointment after all that effort. Then Santa, flying home from his bloody mission, soars past the tree and magically brings the lights back to life. The two stories, the violent rescue and the gentle song, meet in that one moment of light. Santa drops the boys back home safe. Before he goes, he reflects on everything that happened, and he hopes that people will always remember Jesus on this day, the friend who gave his life so that Santa and Christmas could be saved. It is a sincere thought tucked into the end of an episode full of machine guns, a reminder that the holiday is supposed to be about sacrifice and love, even when the path there ran through a war zone. And then comes the final beat, the one fans had been waiting for all season. Kenny appears. After being truly, permanently dead for nearly the entire 6th season, he shows up alive in the last scene. The boys see him and remark that everything is finally back to normal. After a long stretch without their friend, the world clicks back into place, and the show signals that its usual rhythm has returned. There is a lot going on under the surface of all this holiday violence. The most obvious target is the war movie itself. By naming the episode after Black Hawk Down and copying the beats of a serious war film, the shoot down, the captured soldier, the torture, the daring rescue raid, the casualties, the show takes the deadly seriousness of those movies and pops it with the silliest possible cast. When Santa is the prisoner of war and Jesus is the heavily armed rescuer, every grim war movie cliche turns into a punchline. The show seems to be saying that war is so absurd and brutal that you might as well stage it with Santa and Jesus, because the violence is cartoonish no matter who is holding the gun. The setting matters just as much. Once again, the show planted a story in Iraq months before the real war there began. The torture scene, where the captors keep demanding to know what America wants with their country, is a sly nod to the rising tension of the time, the growing sense that an American invasion was coming. South Park kept circling Iraq across this whole season, treating it as a war zone and a flashpoint well before the bombs actually fell. By the time the real war started, the show had already been there several times in its own twisted way. There's also something quietly pointed in turning Jesus into a soldier, the most peaceful figure in the world, the one whose whole message is about loving your enemy and turning the other cheek, picks up a machine gun and slaughters a room full of men without a second thought. The show stages it for laughs, but the image lingers. War pulls everyone into it, the gentle along with the cruel, and even the symbol of peace ends up pulling a trigger. That Jesus then dies in the rescue gives the episode a strange strange echo of the sacrifice story at the heart of Christmas, dressed up in Gunsmoke. Stacked against the earlier stories, this one shows how far the show would stretch the idea of a war mission. A drunk mob became a marching army. A made-up war became a real one. The army chased a goat, then aimed at heaven. And here, a combat rescue in Iraq is carried out not by soldiers at all, but by the two figures most tied to childhood wonder and faith. The show proved it would dress a war story up in absolutely anything, even a Christmas special, and the violence would shine through every time. A holiday about peace on Earth became a bloodbath in the desert, and the contrast is the whole joke. For all its gunfire, the episode never lost its strange sweetness. Santa really did bring Christmas to Iraq. Jesus really did give his life for a friend. The town tree really did light up in the end. Wrapped around all the killing was a story that still believed in the things the holiday is supposed to mean, which is what made the violence land so hard. The warmth and the bloodshed sat right next to each other, neither one canceling the other out. This whole stretch of the show treated Iraq as a faraway war zone, a place of torture rooms and rocket fire and rescue raids, a setting for cartoon soldiers and gun-toting saints. It was always something happening over there on the other side of the world. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Then the war stopped being something far away. A few months after this episode, the real invasion of Iraq finally began, and the fighting everyone had been bracing for became actual news. When the show returned to the subject, it turned its eyes away from the desert and pointed them straight at home, at the loud, ugly screaming match that broke out in American towns over whether the country should be at war at all. Section 6. The War at Home. By the spring of 2003, the war the show had been circling for years was finally real. American forces had invaded Iraq, and the fighting that everyone had braced for was now playing out on every news channel. Across the country, people who had once only argued about whether war was coming were now arguing about a war that had already started. Towns split down the middle. Neighbors who used to get along stopped speaking. And on April 9th, 2003, just as that argument was boiling over in real life, South Park aired its 100th episode, a milestone for the show, and pointed it straight at the fight happening in living rooms all over America. The episode is called I'm a Little Bit Country. For the first time in this whole run, the show mostly turns away from the war zone itself. There are no soldiers shooting their way through a foreign city this time, no army marching on a neighbor, no general planning a mission. The battlefield in this episode is the town of South Park, and the weapons are picket signs and shouting matches. The real subject is not the war over there, it is the war at home. The loud and bitter screaming match between the people who supported the invasion and the people who hated it. The story kicks off the way most school stories do, with kids trying to get out of class. Mr. Garrison, the boy's teacher, announces that any student who wants to protest the war in Iraq can leave school early to attend a big anti-war rally. The moment those words leave his mouth, every single kid in the room declares that they are against the war, grabs their stuff, and heads for the door. They do not actually have any opinion about Iraq. They could not tell you a single fact about the war, the people fighting it, or why it started. They just heard there was a free pass out of school, and being against the war happened to be the price of admission. The boys end up outside milling around the protest when a news crew spots them and decides to interview these passionate young protesters. The reporter asks them a simple question. What do they think the founding fathers would have thought about this war? The founding fathers are the men who started the country long ago, the ones who broke America away from England and wrote the documents the whole nation is built on. It is the kind of question a reporter expects a thoughtful protester to have an answer to. The boys have no answer. They do not even know who the founding fathers were. On live television, in front of the whole town, they reveal that they have no idea what they are talking about, embarrassing themselves and their school. Mr. Garrison is furious. The boys made the school look like a joke, so he hits them with a punishment. They have to write a report explaining what the founding fathers would have thought about the war in Iraq. Suddenly, the free pass out of school has cost them a homework assignment about a subject they know nothing about, which is the kind of trap the show loves to spring on lazy kids who try to game the system. Meanwhile, the grown-ups of South Park are tearing each other apart. The town is cleanly divided. One half is loudly in favor of the war, waving flags and talking about how strong and tough the country is. The other half is loudly against it, marching and chanting and calling the war a disgrace. Neither side will give an inch. The arguing spills into the streets and turns the whole town into a smaller, dumber version of the fight happening across the entire country. The clearest picture of this split comes from two men. Randy Marsh, Stan's dad, lands firmly on the anti-war side. A man named Skeeter stands just as firmly on the pro-war side. The two of them face off in a song, trading verses back and forth, each one singing his side of the argument as hard as he can. Randy belts out why the war is wrong. Skeeter fires back with why the war is right. The song is built so their two views bounce off each other, neither one ever winning, which is the perfect way to show a town stuck in an argument that goes nowhere. The episode's title itself comes from an old song about two people who are very different, and the show twists it into a battle between a man who wants peace and a man who wants war. While the adults shout themselves hoarse, Cartman is busy trying to weasel out of his report. He decides the easiest way to learn what the founding fathers thought is to have a flashback to their time. He starts repeating his own words and waving his hands around, doing his best impression of how flashbacks look on television, trying to force one to happen through sheer effort. It is a stupid plan. And then, somehow, it works. Cartman actually slips back in time, all the way to the days when the founding fathers were alive and deciding what kind of country America would be. What Cartman finds back there is the heart of the whole episode. The founding fathers, the wise men everyone treats as perfect heroes, are themselves split right down the middle, having the exact same argument as the people of South Park. Some of them want to go to war, some of them do not. They shout and bicker, unable to agree, just like the town Cartman left behind. The great founders of the nation turn out to be as divided and stubborn as anyone arguing on a street corner in 2003. Then one of them, Benjamin Franklin, stands up and offers a solution, and it is this solution that the whole episode has been building toward. Franklin suggests that the new country should be able to go to war whenever it wants. At the same time, the country should always have people protesting against those wars. His reasoning is sharp and cynical. If America fights wars, the rest of the world will see it as strong and powerful, a country not to be messed with. But if America also has loud protesters speaking out against those same wars, the rest of the world will see it as kind, free, and caring. That way America gets to have it both ways. It can wage any war it likes while still looking like the good guy who never really wanted to fight. The country gets to be tough and gentle at the same time, simply by keeping both groups around. Cartman returns to the present carrying this answer, and he delivers it to the warring town. He explains that the country needs the pro-war people so America looks strong, and it needs the anti-war people so America looks compassionate. And here is the part that makes the joke bite. Both sides love this answer. The pro-war crowd is happy because it means the war keeps going. The anti-war crowd is happy because it means they get to keep protesting. Everyone feels good, everyone feels important, and nothing about the actual war changes at all. The fighting continues exactly as before, while both halves of the town walk away convinced they have won. Randy and Skeeter, the two singers who started the episode at each other's throats, end up making up. Their dueling song returns at the end, but now the two of them sing it together as friends, having realized that the country needs both of their voices. The bitter fight resolves into a warm, friendly tune, and the town goes back to normal, with the war humming along in the background just like it always was. As for the boys, the episode never lets them off the hook. They were never really against the war. They never cared about the protest, the founding fathers, or any of it. They only pretended to hold a strong opinion so they could skip a few hours of school, and the whole adventure was their punishment for faking something they did not believe. The kid who games the system ends up doing more work than if he had just stayed in class. The reason this episode matters so much in the bigger picture is the point hiding underneath all the singing and time travel. The show is taking a hard look at the loud home front fight over the war and suggesting something uncomfortable. In its eyes, the protesting does not actually stop anything. The marching and the chanting and the picket signs do not slow the war down by a single day. Instead, the whole noisy argument works like a way to let off steam, a safety release that lets the country feel like something is happening while the war rolls on untouched. The protesters get to feel righteous, the war supporters get to feel patriotic, and the people running the war get to keep running it, because the shouting on both sides cancels out and changes nothing. That is a tough thing to say to either side, and the show says it to both. It mocks the clueless protesters who do not even know what they are protesting, the kids who chant against a war they cannot explain. It mocks the flag-waving crowd who support the war without thinking about it. But the sharpest point is aimed at a comforting idea that a lot of people hold. The idea that arguing loudly is the same as doing something. The episode suggests that a country can argue with itself forever and still march straight ahead, and that the argument might even be part of how the marching gets done. Using the founding fathers as the source of this idea is a clever move. By having Benjamin Franklin himself propose the war and protest balance, the show frames the whole thing as being baked into the country from the very start. According to the episode, America was always meant to fight wars while looking like it did not want to. The division, the shouting, the two opposite crowds crowds, all of it is presented as a feature of the system, not a glitch in it. The show takes the men everyone treats as flawless and puts a deeply cynical plan in their mouths, suggesting the nation was built to have its cake and eat it too. Set against everything that came before, this episode marks a real shift. For seasons, the show had treated war as a thing that happened far away, full of soldiers and explosions and rescue missions. The army chased a goat across Afghanistan. Santa and Jesus shot their way through Iraq. The military aimed its weapons at heaven. All of that was about the fighting itself. Here, with a real war finally underway, the show pulls its camera back from the battlefield and points it at the country watching from home. The soldiers are off stage. The argument is the story. And the thing the show puts under the microscope is not the war machine itself, but the engine that keeps it running, which turns out to be the comfortable feeling that yelling about a war counts as opposing it. For all its cynicism, the episode is genuinely funny about it. A town singing its way through a culture war, a boy time traveling to dodge homework, the founding fathers caught bickering like neighbors over a fence. The show wraps a bleak idea in so much silliness that the medicine goes down easy, which is exactly how South Park gets away with saying the things it says. This episode shrank the war down to a town square shouting match, a small and human scale. The threat was an argument, the enemy was your neighbor, and the stakes were whether anyone would finish their homework. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A few years later, the show would blow the scale back up to something enormous. It would imagine a single terror threat landing in a quiet town, and it would unleash the full tangle of government agencies and forces that come crashing down the instant America smells danger. And after all that paranoia and all those agents, the true enemy behind the plot would turn out to be the last country anyone would ever suspect, sailing into attack with a fleet of wooden ships pulled straight out of the history books. Section 7. The Bomb and the Redcoats. By the 11th season, the country had been living with the fear of terrorism for years. The war on terror had become a permanent part of life, and with it came a steady hum of paranoia. Every airport, every news report, every stranger with the wrong look could spark suspicion. In March of 2007, the show aimed straight at all that fear with an episode called The Snook. It is built as a spoof of a famous action television show called 24, a series about secret agents racing against a ticking clock to stop terrible attacks, full of torture scenes, dramatic phone calls, and last-second saves. South Park borrowed that whole frantic style and aimed it at one quiet town, then pulled the most ridiculous twist it could think of out from under everyone. The episode opens in the classroom with a new student. His name is Bahir, and he comes from a Muslim family. The second Cartman lays eyes on him, his brain locks onto one idea. He decides this kid must be a terrorist. He has no reason beyond Bahir's background. There is no clue, no behavior, nothing the boy has actually done. Cartman simply looks at a Muslim classmate and assumes the worst, and he bolts for the classroom door in a panic, telling the teacher the boy is dangerous. Cartman throws himself into proving his theory like a one-kid investigation. He calls Kyle, who is homesick in bed, and orders him to dig up dirt on Bahir online, hunting for any sign of evil plans. After all that digging, the only thing Kyle turns up is laughably small. On Bahir's online profile, his favorite band is listed as one group, but back in class, he had said his favorite band was a different one. That tiny mismatch, a kid changing his mind about which band he likes best, becomes Cartman's smoking gun proof that a terror plot is underway. It is the flimsiest evidence imaginable, and Cartman treats it like cracking a secret code. Convinced he is right, Cartman gets the school evacuated through the town's dim-witted cop, Officer Barbrady. But then he stops and thinks. Terrorists, he reasons, would not waste their time blowing up an elementary school. There must be a bigger target. He has Kyle search for any important events happening in town that day, and Kyle finds one. Hillary Clinton, a major political figure, is coming to South Park for a big public speech to win votes. In Cartman's mind, that has to be the real target. So he calls up one of the country's top spy agencies, demands they cancel the event, and insists on speaking to the president himself. A sick child in his pajamas trying to command the entire government over the phone. Word of a possible threat reaches Hillary Clinton, and she refuses to back down. She announces that she will not be scared off by terrorists and will go ahead with her speech no matter what. And here the episode reveals that something real is actually going on, hidden underneath Cartman's nonsense. One of Clinton's own aides is secretly working with a group of Russian villains who have planted a bomb. The bomb had been meant for the city of Boston, but with all the extra security swarming around, the plotters decide to set it off in South Park instead. So while Cartman chases the wrong suspect for the wrong reasons, a genuine attack really is being set in motion, just not by anyone he suspects. What happens next is the part that makes this this episode belong in any talk about the show and the forces that protect the country. The full weight of America's defense comes crashing down on one small town, and it all ends up crammed into a sick kid's bedroom. Kyle, still in bed with a runny nose and a laptop, becomes the center of the whole operation. One by one, the country's many spy and police agencies pour into his room. The FBI shows up, so does the group in charge of guns and explosives. Then comes the agency in charge of protecting the homeland. Then an international police group. Then the country's main spy agency. Then more after that, until Kyle's tiny bedroom is packed wall to wall with agents in suits. There was a running joke where agents from different groups keep shoving each other aside to take control of Kyle's desk, each one claiming the case is theirs now. The entire defense of the nation is reduced to a crowd of grown men fighting over one kid's desk chair, while he works the actual problem from under his covers. The agents zero in on the bomb and find it in a place nobody expected. A small nuclear bomb, the most powerful kind there is, has been hidden inside Hillary Clinton's body, smuggled in where no one would think to look. The agents give the hidden bomb a silly nickname and treat its discovery like the dramatic turning point of a thriller. When one of Clinton's men tries to reach in and pull the device out, it goes horribly wrong for him. A quick, gruesome gag the show tosses in and moves past. With the bomb located but still live, the race is on to find the trigger that would set it off before it can level the town. Cartman, still certain the answer lies with the Muslim family, decides to get the information his own way, and the show uses this to mock the brutal torture scenes from the action show it is spoofing. On the real series, agents would beat and threaten suspects to make them talk. Cartman's version is to march into Bahir's home and torture the boys' parents by farting in their faces, demanding they reveal the plot. The parents have nothing to confess because they are not involved in anything, and Cartman's cruel little interrogation gets him nowhere except deeper into being the villain of the story. Then a group of Russian villains snatch up Cartman and Bahir, and while holding them captive, they let the real plan slip. The Russians were never the true enemy. They were only a distraction, hired hands working for someone far older and stranger. The mastermind behind the entire plot turns out to be the British. England, America's oldest rival, the country America had broken away from centuries ago, is behind everything, and their attack is not a modern one. While everyone is busy looking for terrorists and bombs, a fleet of old-fashioned British sailing ships, the wooden kind with cannons and sails straight out of the history books, comes gliding in for a surprise attack. The British soldiers in their bright red coats, the same ones America fought in the war for its independence, have sailed across the ocean to finish that old war and take their colonies back. So after all the spy agencies, all the high-tech panic, all the hunting for a Muslim terrorist, the country ends up fighting a battle against antique wooden ships from hundreds of years ago. The forces of the present have to turn around and fight the enemy of the distant past. The British fleet is defeated, the bomb is stopped, and the town is saved. But the path there ran through the single most absurd enemy the show could dream up. A nation armed with every modern weapon and every spy agency in existence is nearly undone by sailing ships and redcoats. The ending leaves a sour taste on purpose. But here, the innocent new kid decides to move away with his family. The reason is Cartman. The boy and his parents are driven out of town by the relentless suspicion and cruelty aimed at them, none of which they ever deserved. And Cartman, instead of feeling any shame, takes credit for chasing them off, proud of himself for getting rid of the people he wrongly accused. Kyle tries to deliver the lesson of the episode, telling everyone that it is wrong to look at a group of people and assume they are all terrorists. It is a clean, decent message, but the show immediately pokes a hole in it. Cartman points out that his suspicion of Bahir, ugly and baseless as it was, is the very thing that got the investigation started and led to the real plot being uncovered. The neat moral falls apart in Cartman's hands, and the show leaves the audience without a tidy answer, which is the kind of move it loves to make. There is a lot worth digging into beneath all the chaos. The biggest target is the giant machine the country built to protect itself from terror. The show imagines a single threat touching down in one quiet town, and in response, the entire defense of the nation comes stampeding in, agency after agency, all of them tripping over each other and fighting for control. The picture it paints is of a system so huge and so paranoid that it cannot get out of its own way. A mountain of agents pointed in every wrong direction, while a sick child does the actual thinking. The show suggests that all that force and all that fear do not add up to clear eyes. The bigger and more frightened the machine gets, the easier it is for the real danger to slip past it. The episode is just as hard on the kind of fear Cartman carries. Cartman looks at a Muslim kid and sees a terrorist, with no proof and no thought, acting on pure prejudice. The show clearly casts him as the bad guy for it, ruining an innocent family's life over a hunch niche built on nothing, but then it refuses to make anyone feel comfortable. By having Cartman's bigotry accidentally lead to a real discovery, the show needles the easy lesson, daring the audience to sit in the discomfort of a story where the cruel, prejudiced kid stumbles into being technically useful. It is not endorsing what Cartman did. It is poking at how messy and unsatisfying these questions really are, and how a clean moral does not always survive contact with the real world. The choice to make the final enemy the British fleet is the masterstroke. After an entire episode soaked in modern terror fears, spy agencies, hidden bombs, and racial suspicion, the actual threat comes from the most ridiculous direction possible: a navy of wooden ships trying to reverse a war that ended centuries ago. The joke lands because of how seriously everyone took the wrong things. All that energy spent fearing the new kid in class, all those agents packed into a bedroom, and the real attack comes sailing in from the history textbook. The country was looking everywhere except the one place the danger actually came from. Lined up against the earlier stories, this episode marks a return to the full machinery of war and defense, but in a new form. In the home front argument from the 100th episode, the military was off stage and the fight was a shouting match. Here, the forces are back in full, except the war is fought against a hidden bomb and an antique fleet, and the heroes are a swarm of bickering agents and a kid in bed with a cold. The show keeps finding fresh ways to point at the same idea, that the people and forces meant to keep the country safe are powerful, paranoid, and aimed at all the wrong targets, again and again. For all its sharpness, the episode never stops being a blast to watch. A nuclear bomb hidden in a politician, a crowd of federal agents brawling over a desk, fart-powered torture, and a surprise invasion by sailing ships, all crammed into one breathless half hour built to mimic a ticking clock thriller. The show takes the most serious fears of its time and runs them through a blender, and somehow the result is both hilarious and pointed at once. This episode took terror, bombs, and the government to a wild place, sending the country to battle against ghosts from the past. But it kept its feet on solid ground, with real agencies and a real city, and an enemy that, however silly, still came by sea. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Later in that very same season, the show would let go of solid ground entirely. It would take the same pieces, terrorists, the government, the military, a bomb, and aim them at a target that exists nowhere on any map. The army would prepare to drop a nuclear weapon, not on a country, not on a town, not even on heaven, but on the world of imagination itself, with every made-up character who ever lived, from cartoon heroes to childhood friends, trapped together in the path of the blast. Section 8, The Bomb Meant for Imagination. In the fall of 2007, South Park attempted its most ambitious story yet. Over 3 episodes aired across 3 weeks in October, the show built a single epic tale that would go on to win an Emmy, one of television's biggest awards, the third the show had ever earned. The story is known as Imagination Land, and it takes every idea this video has been tracking, terrorists, the government, the army, and a giant weapon, and pushes them to a place no other episode had dared to go. By the end, the United States military is preparing to drop a nuclear bomb on the human imagination itself. As always with this show, something enormous grows out of something stupid. The whole thing starts with a bet between Cartman and Kyle. Cartman insists that leprechauns, the little magical creatures from old stories, are real. Kyle says they are not. They make a crude, humiliating wager on it, the kind of bet only these two would make, with Kyle agreeing to do something degrading to Cartman if he loses. And then, against all odds, they actually find a real leprechaun. The creature is not there to grant wishes, it has come to deliver a warning. A terrible attack is coming. Soon after, a man floats down in a magical hot air balloon and offers to take the boys somewhere incredible. He is the mayor of a place called Imagination Land, and he carries Stan, Kyle, and the others off to see it. Imagination Land turns out to be exactly what it sounds like, a world where every character anyone has ever imagined lives together. All the heroes, all the cartoon friends, all the fun and gentle creatures from childhood fill one bright, happy side. The frightening ones, the villains and monsters are kept walled off on the other side, sealed behind a great barrier so they can never hurt anyone. It is a paradise built out of pure make-believe. The warning comes true. Terrorists attack Imagination Land and blow a hole straight through the wall that holds back the evil side. The barrier crumbles, and every monster and villain ever dreamed up comes pouring through. What follows is a slaughter. Beloved characters that generations of kids grew up loving are torn apart on screen. Cherished figures from cartoons and storybooks, the kind of characters meant to make children feel safe, are gunned down, burned, and destroyed by the flood of evil. In one sharp, brutal twist, the terrorists who broke the wall are themselves killed within seconds by the very monsters creatures they set loose, eaten alive by the darkness they thought they could control. The happy world becomes a battlefield, and the gentle characters who survive flee for their lives. In the chaos, the group gets split up. Stan and Butters end up trapped inside Imagination Land, surrounded by evil and fighting to stay alive. Kyle manages to escape back to the real world, but he does not come back whole. The things he saw break something in him. He ends up in a hospital in Washington, hearing the voices of imaginary characters in his head, his mind cracked by an experience no one believes is real. This is where the government and the military take over the story, and where the episode earns its place as the biggest swing this show ever took at the war machine. It turns out the United States has a secret way into Imagination Land. Long ago, during the long standoff between America and Russia, the government built a hidden doorway into the world of imagination, planning to use make-believe itself as a weapon against its enemies. That secret door still exists, hidden away, and now the crisis forces it open. The leaders of the military gathered to deal with the disaster, treating an attack on imagination as a matter of national defense. Their first move is to send in soldiers. A squad is gathered and sent through the doorway into Imagination Land to fight the evil characters. And in a perfectly absurd touch, the squad is led by a famous actor named Kurt Russell, chosen for the job mainly because he had once starred in a movie that was sort of like this situation. The mission is a catastrophe. The soldiers are overwhelmed and destroyed by the monsters, the military's best effort crushed by an army of imaginary villains. With boots on the ground failing, the leaders reach for the only answer they seem to know. They decide to drop a nuclear bomb, the most destructive weapon ever made, straight through the doorway and into the heart of Imagination Land. Their plan to stop the attack on Imagination is to obliterate Imagination entirely. Word of the plan gets out to the public, partly through a leaked recording connected to a politician named Al Gore, and his obsession with a monster he insists is real. Once people learn the government intends to nuke the imagination, a massive argument erupts across the country. Is the government even allowed to do this? Does it have the right to destroy something like imagination? The fight spills into the courts. The boys' silly bet had actually ended up before a judge, and a court had ruled that imaginary characters are, in fact, real, a decision that would make bombing them off limits. So the case climbs all the way to the highest court in the land. There, the top judges overturn the ruling and declare that imaginary characters are not really real after all. With that decision, two things happen at once. The government is now free to bomb Imagination Land, and Kyle is freed from his humiliating bet, since leprechauns and the rest have been officially declared fake. The show plays the legal fight for everything it is worth, mocking the way powerful people will simply redefine what counts as real whenever it is convenient. One day, imagination is real enough to matter, the next, it is fake enough to bomb, and the only thing that changed was what the government wanted to do. While the adults argue and prepare the weapon, the real solution is taking shape inside Imagination Land, and it comes from the least likely hero. Butters, sweet and simple Butters, discovers that he is the key to saving everyone. Because he is a real person standing inside the world of make-believe, he has a power none of the imaginary characters have. He can use his own imagination to create good characters out of thin air, conjuring up an army of heroes to fight back against the evil flood. The fate of the entire imagination comes to rest on the daydreams of one gentle little boy. Cartman, meanwhile, never lets go of the bet for a single second. Even with the world of imagination collapsing, even with the nuclear launch being prepared, his only goal is making sure Kyle has to pay up. He breaks into the heavily guarded military headquarters again and again, trying to get the court ruling changed back so he can win. There is a running joke where the general in charge keeps marveling at how easily young children manage to sneak into the most secure building in the country, as kid after kid wanders into the war room like it is nothing. As the launch draws near, Kyle races to the military headquarters to stop it. Standing before the people about to push the button, he makes the case of his life. He argues that imaginary things are real in the way that truly matters, that the characters and stories people carry in their heads shape who they are, comfort them, and stay with them for life. To destroy imagination, he pleads, would be to destroy something genuinely precious, something as real as anything you can touch. It is a heartfelt speech, and it nearly works. But then Al Gore, desperate to be seen as a hero, rushes forward and slams the launch button himself. The bomb fires through the doorway, and Imagination Land is wiped out in a nuclear blast. Every surviving character, good and evil alike, caught in the explosion. The world is not lost for long. Butters, with his power to imagine, rebuilds everything. He pictures all the good characters alive and well, and they return, brought back from death by a child's mind. He pictures the evil one sealed away again, and the wall is restored, the monsters locked back behind it. Imagination Imagination Land is made whole, saved not by the bomb, not by the soldiers, not by the government, but by the imagination of one ordinary boy. The most powerful weapon in the world failed, and a daydream fixed everything. There is a deep idea running under all the explosions and cartoon cameos. The show is making its sharpest point yet about how the people in charge respond to fear. Faced with an attack on imagination, the government's answer is to destroy imagination. Faced with a threat they do not understand, the leaders reach for the biggest bomb they have and aim it at the very thing they are supposed to be protecting. The show seems to be saying that the people running things have only one tool, force, and they will use it even when using it makes no sense at all, even when it means blowing up the thing they claim to be saving. A scholar who studied the trilogy described it as a portrait of how unimaginative the powerful really are, how their first and only instinct is to bomb a problem out of existence, no matter how foolish that is. The legal fight carries its own sting, by having the courts flip back and forth on whether imagination is real, depending entirely on what the government wanted to do that day. The show points at something uncomfortable about power. The rules bend to fit the decision that has already been made. Reality itself gets redefined to clear the way for the bomb. It is a quiet jab at how leaders can talk themselves into anything once they have decided what they want. And then there is Kyle's argument, which the show clearly believes even as it lets the bomb drop. The idea that imaginary things are real in the way that counts is the warm heart buried inside the cold story. The characters people grow up with, the stories they carry, the made-up friends and heroes of childhood, all of it is real enough to shape a life. The military treats imagination as a target. The show treats it as something sacred. Butter saving the day with nothing but his mind is the show's way of proving Kyle right, of showing that the daydream was always more powerful than the weapon. Set against everything that came before, this is the furthest the show ever pushed its favorite joke. The army once chased a goat across a war zone. It aimed at heaven over weapons nobody could see. It battled a fleet of antique ships. Here, it points a nuclear bomb at imagination itself, at the place where every story and every cartoon friend lives, and it pulls the trigger. There is no bigger or more impossible target than that. The recurring idea that the war machine will aim massive force at the wrong thing, based on fear and a failure to think, reaches its peak in a bomb meant for make-believe. For all its bleakness, the trilogy is a blast of pure creativity. Watching beloved characters from every corner of childhood share the screen, seeing a war fought between heroes and monsters, following a story that bounces from a crude playground bet to the highest court in the country to a nuclear launch. All of it shows a show working at the top of its powers. The Emmy it won was earned. The trilogy is proof that the silliest premises, leprechauns and a degrading bet, can be built into something genuinely grand and surprisingly moving. The story sent the army to the most impossible target of all, a world made entirely of make-believe, and let it fail completely. The bomb went off, and a daydream undid it. The enemy was imaginary, the weapon was real, and the weapon still lost. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The very next year, the show would yank the military back down to solid ground and handed a threat even sillier than evil cartoons. The army would be ordered to round up traveling musicians as if they were a deadly disease. And then, when actual monsters finally clawed their way into a real town, the show would prove something it had been hinting at for years, that when the genuine threat arrives at last, the army's guns and bombs might not do a single thing to stop it. Section 9. The Army Against the Guinea Pigs. In October of 2008, the show put out a two-part story that took its long-running joke about the army and finally pushed it to the punchline it had been building toward for years. The first part was called Pandemic, and the second was called Pandemic 2, The Startling. Across the two episodes, the United States military gets handed two jobs. First, it is ordered to round up traveling musicians as if they were a deadly disease. Then, when actual monsters tear into a real town, the army opens fire with everything it has and accomplishes absolutely nothing. The episodes are a spoof of disaster and monster movies, the kind where the world ends and the camera shakes, and they end up making the cleanest point this show ever made about how useless raw force can be against a real threat. It begins with an annoyance. All over town, groups of musicians from Peru have set up on street corners, playing wooden flutes and selling recordings of their music. Stan cannot stand them. They are everywhere, and the sound grates on him. But where Stan sees a nuisance, the other boys see something else: money. The flute bands are clearly earning a good living selling their music, so the boys decide to start a Peruvian flute band of their own and cash in on the craze. To get the band off the ground, they need money, so they pester their classmate Craig, who has just received $100 for his birthday. Craig wants nothing to do with the scheme, but the boys badger him relentlessly until he finally gives in and hands over his birthday cash to fund the band. Their timing could not be worse. Just as the boys get going, the head of the country's Homeland Security Department, the part of the government in charge of protecting the nation from threats, decides that the flute bands are a menace. His reasoning is staggeringly thin. The bands are not dangerous. They have not hurt anyone. They are simply annoying, and that is enough for him. He launches a nationwide crackdown, ordering every Peruvian flute band in America rounded up, arrested, and locked away in a holding area in Miami. To carry out this roundup, he announces that he is taking command of the entire military, seizing control of the armed forces of the United States so he can use them to chase down street musicians. The full might of the army, redirected to capture men playing flutes. The boys, dressed and performing as their own flute band, get swept up in the raids and arrested along with everyone else, then shipped off all the way to Peru. Throughout all this, Stan's dad Randy is running around with a new camcorder, filming everything in shaky, handheld home video footage. A clear nod to a famous monster movie where the entire disaster is captured through a single panicking person's camera. Randy keeps recording, certain he is documenting something important, mostly capturing chaos and confusion. Then the real horror arrives, and the show reveals the cruel joke at the center of the whole thing. Those annoying flute bands were never the problem. They were the solution. For reasons no one understood, the Peruvian flute music had been keeping a terrible danger at bay this entire time. The moment the bands are rounded up and hauled away, the thing they were holding back comes pouring in. Giant guinea pigs, enormous and unstoppable, begin attacking South Park and then the whole world. The fuzzy little pets people keep in cages have grown to monstrous size, and they rampage through the streets, crushing everything in their path. The government, in its rush to stamp out a harmless annoyance, removed the only shield standing between humanity and the monsters, and brought about the very disaster it should have been preventing. There is one person who can stop it. A prediction holds that a chosen hero will rise to end the threat, and that hero turns out to be Craig, the very kid the boys dragged into their flute band against his will. But Craig is no longer in town. He's been arrested with the others and put on a plane bound for Peru, sent far away to the middle of nowhere right when the world needs him most. The first part ends on a chilling image. The Homeland Security Director sits with a folder, and inside it is a photograph of Craig, the one person who could undo all this. The one person the director has already shipped off to the other side of the planet. And in a darker turn, the director is revealed to be more than just a foolish official. When a scientist studying the outbreak gets too close to the truth, the director shows his true nature as a monster and kills him to keep the secret buried. The second part is where the army finally gets its big moment, and where the show delivers the payoff. The giant guinea pigs, many of them dressed in costumes that make them look like other beasts, go on a worldwide rampage. The show pulled off this effect by filming real living guinea pigs and dropping that footage straight into the cartoon. So actual fuzzy animals lumber through the animated town, which somehow makes them funnier and stranger at once. The United States military rolls in to meet the threat head on. Soldiers take up positions, weapons are aimed. The full firepower of the armed forces is brought to bear on the invading monsters, and it does nothing. The bullets, the guns, all the force the army can muster, none of it has any effect on the guinea pigs. The mightiest military on Earth stands before the real danger and discovers that its weapons are useless. After a career of the show pointing its army at goats and heaven and imagination, here the army faces a genuine monster, fires everything it has, and accomplishes nothing at all. The Homeland Security Director, still convinced he is the smart one, launches into a long ranting speech blaming Craig for everything and insisting that the boy is trying to stop him exactly as the old prediction warned. The irony is thick enough to cut. The only reason Craig is anywhere near the place where he will defeat the villain is that the director himself arrested Craig and put him on the plane to Peru. The director's own paranoid crackdown is what carried the hero to the spot where the prediction would come true. In trying to prevent his doom, he personally delivered himself to it, and when one of the soldiers, fed up, finally opens fire on the director, the bullets simply punch harmless holes through his suit and do nothing else. Even the villain cannot be stopped by force. The army's guns fail against the monsters and fail against the man behind them. Craig, stranded in Peru, ends up at an ancient mountain site, a famous old place high in the hills, and there he fulfills his role as the chosen hero. He does what the soldiers and the guns and the bombs could not. He stops the guinea pigs and brings the disaster to an end, not through firepower, but by being the one person the prediction always pointed to. And as a final little kick, Randy's whole filming project, the shaky footage he risked everything to capture, turns out to be worthless because he forgot a basic step and recorded nothing useful. people. After 2 full episodes of chaos and monsters and military failure, a good chunk of it adds up to nothing at all, which is exactly the kind of deflating ending the show loves. The ideas underneath are sharp and clear. The biggest target is the way the people in charge handle danger. The Homeland Security Director treats a harmless annoyance like a deadly emergency, hijacking the entire army to crush a few street musicians simply because they bother him. In doing so, he destroys the one thing that was actually keeping everyone safe and unleashes the real catastrophe himself. The show is pointing at a frightening kind of foolishness, where leaders are so eager to look tough against small, visible nuisances that they trample the things that really protect people and end up causing the very disaster they claim to be stopping. The whole crackdown is a bigger, dumber version of the security panics the show had been mocking for years. The rush to round up and lock away anyone who seems even slightly out of place. The army's failure against the guinea pigs is the part that lands hardest, because it is the clearest version of an idea this show kept circling. All the way back with the goat, the military was aimed at the wrong target, at heaven and at imagination. It pointed its biggest weapons at things it could never truly destroy. Here, for the first time, a real monster shows up, an actual physical threat tearing through a real town, and the army gets its honest chance to do its job. It fires everything it has, and the monsters do not even slow down. The mighty force that the country pours so much fear and money into turns out to be helpless when the genuine danger finally arrives. The thing that saves the day is not a weapon at all. It is one reluctant kid in a faraway place and a bunch of flute music nobody appreciated. The show seems to be saying that all that firepower is a kind of comfort blanket, impressive to look at and nearly worthless when it counts. The villain being bulletproof drives the same nail in deeper. When the soldier finally shoots the man behind the disaster, the bullets do nothing. Force fails against the monster and force fails against the mastermind. The show keeps slamming the same door. Guns are not the answer here, and the people who reach for them first are the same people who caused the mess. There is also a neat, bitter twist in how the director brings about his own downfall. So afraid of the prediction that a hero would stop him, he goes out of his way to remove that hero from the picture, only to send him directly to the one place where he could win. His fear creates the outcome he feared. It is a tidy little lesson about how panic and paranoia tend to backfire, how the harder these officials grab for control, the more they tend to cause the disaster they are trying to prevent. The craft of the 2 parts is part of the fun. Building the story as a shaky camera disaster movie, with Randy chasing the chaos through his camcorder lens, lets the show poke at the wave of found footage monster films popular at the time. Dropping real, costumed guinea pigs into the animated world is the kind of weird, committed gag that only this show would attempt, and it works precisely because it looks so out of place. Drawing the Homeland Security Director to resemble the real official who held that job at the time gives the satire a sharper edge, tying the foolishness on screen to the real machinery of national security. And the running joke in the second part, where the director keeps announcing how startled he is, gives the title its name and keeps the tone goofy even as the world ends. For all the destruction, the episodes never take themselves too seriously, which is what lets the point slip in so cleanly. A money scheme gone wrong, a crackdown on flute players, an army that cannot kill a guinea pig, a bulletproof monster in a suit, and a hero who saves the world by accident, all wrapped in shaky home video footage. The show buries a genuinely cutting idea about force and fear inside one of the silliest stories it ever told, and the silliness is exactly why it lands. This story let the army fire its full arsenal at a real monster and watch every shot bounce off. It was the bluntest the show had ever been about the limits of military might. An entire armed force rendered helpless while a child and some flute music did the real work. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A few years later, the show would find a way to make the army's behavior stranger still. It would imagine a single boy with a private, baseless fear, a fear built on nothing but his own ugly prejudice, and it would show the military treating that one child's panic as a national emergency, mobilizing its full power to hunt down a danger that existed nowhere except inside that boy's head. Section 10. The War on a Feeling. In October of 2013, the show reached the strangest target it would ever point the army at. Not a goat, not heaven, not a monster, not even the world of imagination. This time, the army goes to war against a feeling, a single boy's private fear, built on nothing but his own ugly prejudice. The episode is called World War Zimmerman, and it stands as the sharpest, darkest version of an idea this show had been chewing on for 14 years. To understand it, two real things have to be set side by side. The first is a movie that came out that same year, a huge film about a disease that spreads across the globe and turns ordinary people into raging zombies, sprinting through cities and swarming over walls. The hero races around the world trying to find the source before everything collapses. The second is a real and painful event. A man named George Zimmerman had shot and killed an unarmed black teenager named Trayvon Martin, and a court had found him not guilty. The verdict set off enormous anger and grief across the country, with protests in city after city. The show took the panic of the zombie movie and the raw nerve of that real case and welded them together into one story, with Cartman at the center of it. It begins quietly, almost sweetly, which makes what follows even worse. At school, Cartman starts being weirdly nice to Token, the only black kid in the boys' class. He compliments him, asks to hang out, goes in for a fist bump. Stan and Kyle watch this and immediately get nervous, muttering that Cartman is doing it again, that whatever is going on in his head is going to turn into something terrible. They are right. When the school counselor, Mr. Mackey, asks Cartman what is bothering him, Cartman finally says it out loud. He is terrified of Token. In his mind, the one black kid in his class is a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. There is no reason behind this. Token has done nothing. Cartman's fear is built entirely out of his own prejudice, a danger he has invented from scratch. The shape of that fear gets shown through a nightmare Cartman keeps having. In the dream, he is the hero of that zombie movie, a grown man with a wife and two daughters trying to keep his family safe as the world falls apart. Stuck in traffic, they turn on the radio and hear that George Zimmerman has been found not guilty. In Cartman's twisted imagination, the black people who are angry and grieving over that verdict are not people at all. They are the zombies, a swarming, mindless horde charging through the streets, coming for him. That is how Cartman pictures it. Real human anger over a real injustice, reduced in his frightened little mind to a monster outbreak. The show is being deliberately blunt here, laying Cartman's racism out in the open so no one can mistake what it is. Following Mackey's advice to make peace, Cartman writes a poem for Token and even performs a musical version of it at a school assembly. The performance is not really an apology. It is Cartman publicly insisting that he has nothing to do with the Zimmerman case, scrambling to clear his own name for a thing nobody had blamed him for. When Token, understandably, takes offense at the idea that he is supposed to feel bad just because Cartman feels scared, Cartman snaps. In his mind, this is the moment the disaster begins. The outbreak, he decides, has started, and from there, the whole world tips into madness, all of it driven by one boy's groundless terror. What Cartman does next is genuinely unhinged. He grabs a survival kit from home, picks up a random woman to be his companion through the apocalypse, and rushes to the airport, where he takes over an entire passenger plane. He warns the people on board that the only way any of them will survive the spreading contagion is to flee to a place the sickness cannot reach. The passengers, of course, are terrified, not of any disease, but of the screaming child who has hijacked their flight. When one of them tries to break free, panic erupts and the plane goes down, crashing into the Rocky Mountains. Cartman and the woman walk away alive. Many of the people on that plane do not. This will happen more than once, and by the end, the death toll from Cartman's crashes climbs into the hundreds, a body count racked up entirely in service of a danger that never existed. Cartman decides the way to stop the outbreak is to go to its source. In his thinking, the anger of black Americans was set off by the Zimmerman verdict. So if he can get to George Zimmerman in Florida and deal with him, he can shut the whole thing down. First, he stops at the town gun shop run by Jimbo, hoping to buy a rifle to use against Token. Jimbo explains the rules of a particular law, telling Cartman he cannot legally shoot a person unless he feels threatened inside his own home. That law, which lets someone open fire if they claim to feel in danger, sits at the heart of the real Zimmerman case, and the show keeps circling back to it. Cartman and the woman set off for Florida anyway. Along the way, the woman is run over and killed, another casualty of Cartman's quest, brushed aside almost as a footnote. Cartman presses on alone, and when he finally reaches Zimmerman's house, he arrives with his face painted dark, dressed up to look black, an act the show uses to set up its most pointed and uncomfortable punch. Here is where the military steps in, and where this episode earns its place as the final case in this whole story. While Cartman has been crashing planes and chasing Zimmerman, his panic has spread upward into the highest levels of the government. A general of the United States Army gets hold of a drawing Cartman made, a child's scribble labeling Token as the source of the outbreak, the first carrier of the disease, the place where it all began. Any reasonable person would look at that drawing and see exactly what it is, a crayon picture made by a scared, prejudiced kid. The general does not see that. He takes the drawing as real evidence of a genuine disease outbreak. On the strength of a child's doodle, the army mobilizes. The full weight of the military swings in into motion to fight a contagion that exists nowhere except inside Cartman's head. The general then does something that pulls the whole twisted logic into the open. He goes to George Zimmerman's home, not to arrest him, but to recruit him. The army wants Zimmerman's help to fight the outbreak, and what the army asks him to do is the thing the show has been building toward with horrible precision. They ask George Zimmerman to do what he is known for. They ask him to shoot a young black person, framing it as the way to stop the spreading disease. The military, the most powerful organized force in the country, has been led by one boy's racist fear to the point where its official plan is to ask a man to shoot a black teenager. The moment lands exactly as the show intends. Zimmerman, presented with what he believes is a young black person at his door, shoots Cartman, who is standing there in his dark face paint, and the officials present praise him for it. They congratulate Zimmerman for saving them all, for putting down the threat, for stopping the outbreak. Then an agent takes a closer look and discovers the truth. The person Zimmerman shot is not black at all. It is a white kid wearing makeup. The instant that becomes clear, everything flips. Zimmerman is arrested, put on trial, found guilty, and executed for attempted murder. The same act, the same shooting, draws applause when the target is believed to be black and ends in execution when the target turns out to be white. The show stages this double standard with cold clarity, refusing to soften it, letting the brutal contrast speak for itself. Cartman somehow survives the shooting. He returns to South Park and offers Token an apology. Token is still upset, and rightly so, having been cast as the source of a deadly plague by a kid who crashed planes and got people killed chasing a fantasy. And then, in the final beat, Cartman tricks Token into stepping close enough that Cartman could shoot him under the very law Jimbo had explained, the one that lets a person fire if they feel threatened in their own space. The cycle starts over. The fear never dies. Cartman ends the episode right back where he began, his prejudice fully intact, ready to do it all again. The ideas underneath this story are the deepest the show ever dug into on this subject. The biggest one is what the outbreak actually is. There is no disease in this episode. There are no zombies. The thing that spreads, the real contagion, is Cartman's fear, his baseless, racist panic. And it behaves exactly like a sickness. It starts in one boy, it jumps to the school, it jumps to the gun shop, to a plane load of strangers, to the government, and finally to the army itself. By the end, the most powerful military on Earth is acting on a feeling that began in the head of a single frightened child. The show is making a chilling point about how fear, and especially fear aimed at people because of their race, can move from person to person and institution to institution until everyone is reacting to a threat that was never real in the first place. The disease was always the fear, and the army caught it like everyone else. The image of the general treating a child's drawing as evidence is the whole argument in a single picture. Up the chain it goes, a crayon scribble, and instead of laughing it off, the people with the tanks and the soldiers and the weapons take it seriously and start preparing for war. It is the clearest version yet of an idea this show kept returning to, that the military does not stop to question the fear it is handed. It simply acts. Give it a goat and it storms a country. Give it a blurry photo of clouds and it talks about bombing heaven. Give it a child's frightened doodle and it mobilizes to hunt down a danger that lives only in that child's imagination. The force is enormous, and the thinking behind it is almost non-existent. The double standard at the end is the show at its most savage. By having Zimmerman cheered for shooting someone believed to be black and then executed the moment that person turns out to be white, the episode shines a harsh light on the way value can be assigned to a life based on the color of skin. The show does not lecture about it. It builds the contrast into the plot itself and lets the audience sit in the discomfort of watching the exact same act treated as heroism and then as murder, the only thing changing being the race of the victim. It is the kind of moment that makes people uneasy, and the unease is the point. The show is forcing a look at something real and ugly by pushing it to its most extreme conclusion. There is also something pointed in how the show built this episode so fast, the way it had once done after the attacks of September 11th. The Zimmerman verdict was still a fresh wound in the country when this aired, the protests still recent, the pain still raw. Most shows would never touch a real death and a real racial firestorm that quickly. South Park dove straight in, grabbing the moment while it was still burning. The same nerve it showed when it put the war in Afghanistan on screen within weeks. That speed is part of what gives the episode its sting. It was not looking back at history. It was reacting to the present, in real time, with no safe distance to hide behind. Standing at the end of this whole story, the episode lets the full pattern come into view. Across 14 years, from a drunken reenactment in the third season to this this nightmare in the 17th, the show's view of the military stayed remarkably steady. The army faced a drunk mob with fake guns and nearly lost. It declared a real war on a friendly neighbor and sorted its own soldiers by skin color to decide who would die first. It stormed a country to rescue a goat it mistook for a singer. It prepared to bomb heaven over weapons no one could see. It battled a fleet of antique ships while missing the threat in front of it. It dropped a nuclear bomb on imagination itself. It fired everything it had at giant monsters and accomplished nothing. And finally, it went to war against a feeling, a danger that existed only inside one boy's prejudiced mind. The thread running through all of it is clear. The military in this show is a force of staggering power that is forever pointed at the wrong target, driven by a fear it never questions and either useless or destructive whenever it actually acts. What makes this final case the darkest is the nature of the target. The goat was at least a real animal. The guinea pigs were at least real monsters. Here, the army marches against nothing at all, against a fear with no body, no source, no truth to it. The show had spent years showing the military aimed at the wrong things. In this episode, it shows the military aimed at a thing that does not exist and treating it with deadly seriousness anyway. That is the bleakest place the idea could possibly go, and the show takes it there without blinking. For all its heavy ideas, the episode is built like a thrill ride, copying the breathless pace of the zombie movie it spoofs. Cartman racing across the country, the crashing planes, the survival kit, the desperate journey to find the source. All of it mimics the structure of the film while filling it with the most uncomfortable content the show could find. The comedy and the horror sit right on top of each other, the laughs and the discomfort impossible to pull apart, which is exactly how the show wanted it. The humor is the spoonful that makes the bitter idea go down, and the idea is bitter indeed. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Cartman pays no real price. He survives, he apologizes without meaning it, and then he immediately sets up the next round, ready to repeat the whole cycle. The fear does not get cured. The lesson does not get learned. The show refuses the comfort of an ending where the prejudice is defeated and everyone grows. Instead, it leaves the audience with the unsettling truth that this kind of fear is stubborn, that it survives every disaster it causes, and that it will simply start over the moment it gets the chance. The contagion never really ends. It just waits for its next host. These 10 cases span the better part of 2 decades, and across all of them, the show kept treating the military and the machinery of war as something to be laughed at, questioned, and never fully trusted, no matter who was in charge or what the threat of the day happened to be. From the very beginning, the army was the powerful fool, the giant aiming its fists at shadows. The show is still doing it now. Years after this episode, with a new president and a new set of fights tearing through the country, South Park would bring the war machine all the way home. It would put soldiers and tanks right in the streets of the nation's capital, fill the heart of America with troops and armored vehicles, and turn its cameras on a country that had started to look like a war zone within its own borders, proving that after all these years, its eye for the military had not softened one bit. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.